What if you attended a funeral and the person in the casket opened their eyes at you? That's the thought that clawed at Michael's mind the night everything began. He hadn't planned on going to a funeral that day. In fact, he had been on his way to work, already late, when the storm broke. Sheets of rain battered the windshield. Thunder cracked so violently the steering wheel rattled in his hands. He pulled off the highway in search of shelter, following a winding country road until he saw it. A small, weather-beaten church standing alone among fields of swaying grass. Its steeple leaned like a crooked finger against the black clouds. Cars were parked haphazardly outside, their wipers twitching like dying insects. Michael assumed there'd be coffee inside, maybe a restroom where he could wait out the storm. He ran from his car to the church, shoes slapping puddles, and ducked into the heavy wooden doors. The silence inside struck him immediately. Thick, suffocating. The air smelled of lilies, candle wax, and something faintly metallic. Rows of pews stretched before him, packed with mourners dressed in black. Heads turned at the sound of the door, eyes dull with grief but strangely expectant. Michael froze. This wasn't a service break. This was a funeral. He opened his mouth to apologize, to explain he'd wandered in by mistake. But then he saw the casket. It rested at the front of the church, open. Satin gleamed pale in the flicker of candlelight. And inside, Michael's breath caught in his throat. The body lying there looked exactly like him. Same face, same jawline, same faint scar above the eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. Even the hair, dark and slightly messy, as though it had been styled but couldn't quite be tamed. Michael felt as though he were staring into a mirror drained of life. He gripped the pew for balance, the world tilting under him. A prank, it had to be. A coincidence. Some distant cousin he never knew existed. Yet as he stumbled forward, drawn against his will, every detail screamed you. The whispers started then. Mourners leaned close to each other, their voices just loud enough to tickle his ears. He came after all. I told you he would. It's time now. Michael shook his head, heart pounding. They were looking at him with recognition, not confusion, not shock. Recognition. He tried to back away, to retreat toward the door, but his legs betrayed him, carrying him forward instead, down the aisle toward the open casket. His reflection, no, his double, lay still beneath the pale lights, hands folded neatly across his chest. Michael leaned closer, every nerve screaming at him to stop. And then the corpse's eyes opened, pale, bloodshot, unblinking. They locked directly on Michael's own, a perfect mirror staring back. Michael staggered back with a strangled gasp. His hand flew to his mouth, his pulse hammering in his skull. The mourners didn't flinch. No gasps, no screams. Only silence, as if they had been waiting for this. The dead man's lips twitched, slowly, painfully, forming words that only Michael could hear. You're late. The candles flickered violently, plunging the church into shadows. Michael's throat tightened as though invisible fingers had wrapped around it. The corpse's eyes remained locked on his, pale and watery, yet unmistakably alive. His reflection, his double, lay half-buried in satin, lips curling in that faint, grotesque twitch that passed for a smile. He blinked hard, convinced he must be hallucinating. Too much stress, too little sleep. He had pulled late shifts all week. Maybe this was some stress-induced nightmare. But the cold bite of the church air on his skin told him otherwise. He wasn't dreaming. The corpse's lips moved again. Michael's heart thudded so violently he could hear it in his ears. You don't belong. The voice was barely audible, a rasp that seemed to crawl from the coffin rather than pass through air. And yet, Michael heard it as though whispered directly into his mind. He stumbled backward, his shoes squeaking on the church floor. His eyes darted to the crowd. Surely someone else had seen it. But the mourners sat utterly still, their faces smooth and unreadable. They were watching him, not the body, Not the casket. Him. One woman, her veil trailing like cobwebs down her shoulders, leaned toward the man beside her and murmured something. Her lips didn't move quite right. They stretched too wide at the corners, as though unused to human speech. The man beside her nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Michael. Michael's instinct screamed at him to run. His legs, heavy with fear, finally obeyed. He spun and bolted down the aisle toward the entrance doors, heart pounding like a war drum. But when he shoved the heavy wooden doors open, the world beyond the threshold was gone. No rain, no cars, no trees, only blackness. A void stretched infinitely in every direction, swallowing the light from inside the church. Michael staggered back, slamming the door shut with a gasp. The air inside the church seemed thicker now, heavier, as if it pressed down on his chest with every breath. He turned toward the pews. The mourners hadn't moved. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even the faint sound of breathing. They sat as if carved from wax, eyes glimmering faintly in the candlelight. Michael's panic surged. He rushed toward a side door near the pulpit, his shoes echoing loudly in the suffocating silence. He grabbed the brass handle and yanked, but the door didn't budge. Locked. A sound slithered up from behind him. The casket creaked. He froze, every hair on his body standing on end. Slowly, against his will, he turned. The corpse, his double, was sitting up. Its movements were stiff, jerky, like a puppet tugged on tangled strings. Its chin tilted, vertebrae cracking audibly as the head lifted to face him. Those same pale eyes bore into him with unblinking malice. Michael pressed back against the locked side door, his breath shuddering. "This isn't real," he whispered, though the words sounded pathetic even to his own ears. The double swung its legs over the edge of the casket. Satin tore as fingernails scraped against the fabric. Bare feet, pale and veined, lowered onto the polished wooden floor. The mourners rose in unison, not gradually, not naturally, as one. Their movements too synchronized, too rehearsed. The entire congregation stood like soldiers awaiting orders, their heads bowing slightly toward the corpse. The double pointed one rigid finger at Michael. "He came," one of the mourners whispered. The voice carried through the church like a gust of wind, though the lips of the speaker barely moved. "It's time," another murmured. Michael's chest heaved. He rattled the door handle again, slamming his shoulder against it, desperate to break free. The wood didn't even shudder. The corpse began to walk. Each step echoed hollowly, louder than it should have in the cavernous church. Its bare feet left faint, wet prints on the polished wood, though no water clung to its skin. Michael tried to scream, but the sound caught in his throat. His mind raced for explanation, for reason, for anything that could anchor him to reality. But all he saw was his own face, slack and lifeless, approaching him with the calm certainty of death itself. The double stopped only a few feet away. Its lips pulled into a ghastly smile. And then, for the first time, the mourners moved. They stepped out into the aisle, circling slowly, forming a barrier around Michael. Their faces tilted toward him, blank yet suffused with something that felt like hunger. The corpse raised its hand, and every candle in the church guttered low, plunging the room into near darkness. Michael pressed back against the door, his palms slick with sweat. "Why me?" he croaked. The corpse's eyes gleamed. Its voice rasped again, louder this time, filled with a terrible certainty. "Because you were supposed to be here." And then the lights went out completely. The man staggered backward, his breath catching in his throat as the corpse's eyes, his own eyes, snapped open with a sickly wet sound. They weren't just eyes of the dead. They were alive, watching, unblinking, and far too aware. The room seemed to tilt, the mourners frozen mid-sob, mid-whisper, as though time itself had stuttered. His trembling fingers gripped the back of a pew for support, but even the wood beneath his hands felt wrong, warmer than it should be, as though it too was alive and pulsing. The corpse in the casket twitched, its lips parting ever so slightly, and though no words escaped, the man swore he heard a whisper echo directly inside his skull. "You don't belong here." His mind reeled, fighting between the instinct to run and the paralyzing terror that locked his legs in place. The mourners slowly turned their heads toward him, one by one, their faces expressionless, eyes hollow, yet somehow filled with accusation. Not a single person spoke, but he felt their silent judgment crash down like a wave, suffocating him. He glanced again at the casket, at the too familiar face now twitching, almost smiling, a grotesque imitation of life. The resemblance was no coincidence. This wasn't just a stranger who looked like him. This was him, dead, yet alive, staring at him with the weight of eternity. Desperate for air, he stumbled toward the doors of the chapel, but the room stretched unnaturally, each step dragging him farther away instead of closer. The organ in the corner groaned to life on its own, playing a haunting, broken hymn that filled the chamber with dread. The dead version of himself in the coffin raised a single, trembling hand, pointing directly at him. The mourners stood in unison, their mouths moving in unison, as if chanting some prayer in a language older than words. Panic burned through him, and in a burst of adrenaline he screamed. But the sound came out muffled as though the air itself swallowed his voice. Still, that whisper pressed against his skull, clearer now, almost playful. "We saved you a place. Would you like me to continue this scene until it builds toward a final terrifying climax where the man realizes why the funeral is his own?" His heart thundered, each beat echoing painfully in his chest, as though it might burst from sheer terror. He looked again at the casket and saw his own dead face shift, the lips curling into a grotesque smirk, the pale skin stretching unnaturally like wax melting under heat. The corpse blinked slowly, deliberately, like it was savoring the moment of recognition. The man wanted to look away, but he couldn't. He was trapped in a staring contest with himself, with the version of him that should not exist. The eyes staring back were not merely human. They seemed endless, like black pools leading into some abyss that had been waiting specifically for him. The mourners began moving closer, their steps perfectly in sync, the soft creak of the floorboards marking their approach. He saw their faces more clearly now. They weren't just strangers. Their features were disturbingly blurred, as if half erased, but in every hollow expression he recognized fragments of people he once knew. His childhood neighbor, an old teacher, the cashier from the corner shop. Faces that belonged to the dead. Faces he had forgotten until this very moment. They were all here, watching him attend his own funeral. He turned, desperate, forcing himself to stumble toward the chapel doors. His legs felt heavy, his shoes dragging as if the ground beneath him was pulling him back. The organ's twisted hymn grew louder, impossibly loud, vibrating in his bones. The doors loomed ahead, but when he pushed against them, the wood groaned and refused to budge. No lock, no handle, just resistance, as if the world itself denied his escape. He pounded his fists against the doors until his knuckles split, blood smearing the old wood, but the sound was swallowed instantly. No one outside would ever hear him. A sudden cold hand clamped down on his shoulder. He froze, his stomach twisting, bile burning the back of his throat. Slowly he turned his head, expecting to see one of the mourners. But it wasn't. It was him. The corpse from the casket now stood behind him, its flesh sagging, its eyes alive with a cruel glint. Up close, the smell of decay clung to it, clung to him, and yet it smiled as if delighted. The corpse leaned in close, its cracked lips brushing against his ear, and whispered in his own voice, "You were never meant to walk out. This is your funeral. You've been dead all along." The room erupted in applause. Not cheers, not joy, but a slow, deliberate clapping from the mourners, echoing in rhythm with the organ's distorted hymn. The man's vision blurred, his knees buckling, and as he fell, he caught one final glimpse of the casket. It was no longer empty. His own body, freshly dead, perfectly still, was lying inside once more. The other version of him had disappeared. and then the lid slammed shut. Would you like me to continue and build an even darker twist, where he discovers the funeral is an endless loop, replaying for eternity, trapping him as both the mourner and the corpse? Michael's vision swirled as the coffin lid slammed shut. The echo of his own name, whispered in his skull, clung to him like a cold fog. He scrambled backward, his palms sliding on the polished floor, and for a moment he thought he'd finally broken free. But the chapel wasn't empty. The mourners, pale and motionless moments ago, now surged forward, filling every aisle, every pew, surrounding him like a tightening noose. Their hollow eyes glinted, reflecting the flickering candlelight, but this time their expressions held something new. Hunger. He tried the doors again, shoulder against the heavy wood, but they didn't move, not even an inch. He screamed, a raw, tearing sound, and yet the walls swallowed it instantly. The organ groaned lower, a sinister hum threading through every nerve in his body, vibrating against his teeth. Every instinct screamed at him to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The air thickened, pressing down, cold as ice and damp as a grave. Michael's heartbeat pounded like a drum, each thud echoing in the stillness of the room. Then came movement, slow, deliberate, horrifying. The casket shuddered. He froze. With a wet, bone-chilling groan, the lid creaked open once more. It wasn't his corpse that emerged this time. Or maybe it was partially him. The face unmistakably familiar, yet twisted, distorted, unrecognizable. The skin seemed stretched over angles it shouldn't have, the jaw too long, the eyes too wide. Every movement was deliberate, jerky, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. It stepped down from the casket with unnatural grace, and every step left faint burn marks on the polished floorboards. Michael backed away, heart racing, only to feel the pew behind him wobble and snap. Splinters shot into his palms, blood seeping through, but he didn't notice. The room itself seemed to shift. Walls warped, elongating, closing in, while the windows pulsed with a dim light, like watching the world breathe in slow, eerie time. And then he heard it, a chorus of whispers threading together, a low chant that resonated in the very marrow of his bones. Join us. Join us. Join us. Michael shook his head violently. No, I'm not one of you. The words rang out, but the mourners paid no attention. Instead, they advanced, circling him, hands raised, motionless yet impossibly close. Each step they took echoed with the sound of shattering glass and broken bones, though nothing touched the floor. His eyes darted to the pulpit. Perhaps he could climb, hide, escape somehow. But as he ran, he stumbled across something unexpected. Dozens of mirrors lined the walls, old, ornate, tarnished. But each reflected not the chapel, not himself, but moments from his life. Childhood birthdays, family dinners, the first kiss, the day he got his driver's license, and intertwined with every memory, flashes of something else. A shadowed figure lurking just out of frame, always watching, always smiling, never letting him forget. He froze in front of one mirror. His reflection smiled back at him. Not the smile of relief, not the smile of familiarity, but the smile of someone who knew the truth. The reflection leaned forward, pressing against the glass as though it could step out and take him. And then it spoke, not in whispers, but in a voice so loud it seemed to tear through his skull. You've been dead longer than you know. You were never supposed to leave. Michael reeled backward, staggering over a pew. A crash reverberated through the chapel. The coffin had toppled forward. Inside lay nothing. Just an empty cavity. The haunting realization struck him like a hammer. The casket didn't hold him. It held something else. Or maybe it never needed to. A cold, clammy hand gripped his ankle. He yelped and fell, scrambling across the floor, slipping in the shadows. Hands, dozens of them, emerged from the floorboards, from cracks, from nowhere at all, clawing at him, whispering his name in tortured, childlike voices. He kicked, punched, cursed, but they were relentless. The whispers grew into screams, overlapping, rising, echoing off every warped surface, driving him to the edge of sanity. He leapt to his feet, chest heaving, and ran toward the altar. The pulpit itself began to shift. The wood stretched upward like a living thing, twisting into grotesque shapes. From the shadows beneath it, figures crawled forward. Mourners, faceless now, limbs warped, their movements jagged, unnatural. Michael's stomach twisted, bile rising as the realization sank in. There was no escape. Every door, every wall, every shadow had been orchestrated. Every moment of his life had led here. The reflection in the mirrors multiplied, showing him dozens, hundreds of himself, each screaming silently, each being pulled toward some unseen abyss behind the glass. The whispers now merged into a single chilling sentence, reverberating in his mind. You were chosen. You belong with us. Michael's scream was lost in the void. He stumbled backward and fell into the altar. A hollow wind surged through the chapel, extinguishing candles, plunging the room into darkness so complete it seemed physical. From the floorboards below, the hands coiled around him, lifting, dragging, pulling. He clawed at the air, kicking, screaming, but there was no light, no door, no sanctuary. And then, silence. Michael opened his eyes. The chapel was empty. The coffin was upright. The mourners sat as if nothing had happened, and in the casket lay a body. His body. Pale, still, peaceful. The whispering voices had vanished. The mirrors reflected only the chapel, empty and normal. He stumbled back in disbelief, gripping the pews. Had it been a hallucination? A fevered nightmare? Yet deep in his chest he felt it. The cold certainty that the funeral had not ended. That some part of him had already joined the ranks of the dead, trapped in the mirrored labyrinth beneath the floorboards of this church, waiting for the next unwitting visitor. And as he turned to flee, a faint, childlike giggle echoed through the rafters. It was soft, almost welcoming, yet brimming with malice. Next time, it will be easier. Michael froze, blood pounding, as the faintest creak came from the floorboards. Something beneath the wood moved. Something patient, ancient, and endlessly hungry. Michael's legs gave way beneath him as the creaking floorboards whispered their warnings. That faint giggle, soft and cruel, came again. Closer this time, circling him like a predator playing with its prey. He stumbled toward the church doors, praying the wood would yield, but every handle was ice cold, immovable, as if the building itself had grown sentient and intended to trap him forever. He spun around, heart hammering, and saw the coffin lid inch open. Slowly, deliberately, his own corpse sat upright, hair matted, eyes hollow yet watching, lips curling into that unnatural smirk he had seen before. It was him, but not him. Something older, darker, and infinitely patient had taken residence in that face, in that body. "Michael!" the figure rasped, voice hollow yet perfectly his own. "You finally came." He wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. The walls of the chapel began to pulse, stretching, bending, closing in. Mirrors on the walls now reflected not the room, but a distorted vision of his life. Birthdays that never happened, conversations he never remembered, streets he never walked. And in each reflection, a pale version of himself waited, seated, silent, eyes wide with recognition and dread. The whispers returned, dozens of voices overlapping, echoing in perfect unison. "Join us. You belong. It's time." Michael's stomach twisted. His mind raced. Each instinct screamed that he had stumbled into something impossible, something that defied every rule of life and death. Yet deep in his chest, a cold certainty gnawed at him. The funeral had never been about mourning. It had been about waiting. Waiting for him to arrive, to complete the ritual that had already begun long before he had stepped through the church doors. He backed away, heart pounding, eyes darting for anything, anywhere to escape. The floorboards beneath him cracked, splintering under the weight of unseen forces. Hands, pale, skeletal, delicate yet horrifyingly strong, emerged from the gaps, gripping his ankles, wrists, tugging him down. He struggled, kicking, screaming, but the forces were relentless, dragging him inch by inch toward the casket. The corpse in the coffin smiled wider, impossibly wide, its jaw cracking in unnatural angles. "You've been dead longer than you realize," it whispered. "This has always been your place." Michael's mind erupted with panic and confusion. Memories, half-formed and alien, flooded in. Lying in hospital beds he didn't remember, waking in streets that were empty, shadows that followed him even in daylight. He saw glimpses of himself under the coffin's lid, pale and unmoving, watching the living world, trapped in a limbo that had always been waiting. "No!" he cried, clawing at the hands pulling him downward. "I'm alive! I'm alive!" But reality bent against him. The walls of the chapel stretched into infinity, the ceiling rising like a vault of darkness. The candles flickered violently, casting shadows that seemed to crawl along the floor, twisting into shapes that resembled his family, his friends, then turning into hollow versions of himself, grinning, whispering, beckoning. The hands dragged him closer. He fell forward, sprawling onto the casket's edge. His eyes met his own corpse's eyes, hollow, patient, inevitable. The whispers surged into a roar. "You belong here. You are here. You always were." A cold, creeping numbness spread through Michael's body. Panic turned to terror, terror to icy resignation. He felt himself being lifted, suspended above the coffin, staring at the pale, grinning version of himself. And in that moment, he realized the truth. He had never truly been alive. The funeral, the mourners, the mirrors, the chapel itself, they were all part of the trap. Michael's entire life had been a gradual pull into this moment, orchestrated by forces beyond understanding. Every choice he thought he had made, every memory of living, had been preparation for this one act: to join the ranks of the waiting dead, seated eternally in the mirrored limbo of the church. The hands tightened, pulling him closer. The corpse smiled wider. The chapel stretched into darkness, and Michael's consciousness began to fray. He screamed, a sound swallowed immediately by the void. He felt himself slipping, his body merging with the pale stillness of the coffin beneath him. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the reflection of a new mourner in the mirrors. His face, seated silently, eyes wide with recognition, waiting for the next visitor to wander through the church doors. When Michael awoke, or thought he did, the chapel was silent. The coffin was closed. The mirrors reflected only empty pews. The mourners were gone. Yet deep in his chest, he felt it, the cold certainty that he had not truly left. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, in the hidden corridors of mirrored shadows, part of him remained, waiting for another soul to wander into the wrong funeral, waiting for the next whisper, the next hand, the next inevitable truth. You never leave the wrong funeral. It leaves you. And outside, the rain fell softly on the empty country road, masking the faintest echo of a childlike, sinister giggle carried on the wind. "Next time, it will be easier,"